Are you okay?
Ow!
Yes! Welcome, everyone, to the Star Trek, our continuation of us at Timelines Talks, watching through the Star Trek series and continuing with our series of the Star Trek pilots. We go on to Star Trek Deep Space Nine, The Emissary, and we have just concluded watching said two-parter introduction to the first real spin-off, an actual spin-off from the Star Trek franchise, and one that's very different, approached very differently to what has traditionally been established as what Star Trek is, and was very very divergent in people's opinions on this show. Divisive was the word I was trying to find. Absolutely. We've just finished watching this, as we said, and I've got to say, guys, this was great. This is probably going up there as one of my favorite pilots.
I think it's easily the strongest of all of the classic era Star Trek pilots, up into including the Cage, which has it has its problems. It's got a lot of promise. Farpoint, which is in some ways amateurish. And then you've got Caretaker. We'll get into, but I like it okay. It's not as much as this. Broken Bow is okay. It's very 2000s. I think I probably rate this one up just above my second favorite, which is actually Where No One Has Gone Before. I actually think that's a really strong pilot, although we haven't talked about it here. But until Strange New Worlds, I would have easily said this is the strongest pilot of any Star Trek show. It is such there's still a lot that's not fully formed about it, but you can really tell they had a strong vision and they went for it. And for the most part, I think probably 90-95% of it works. It's a very strong start, in my opinion.
Yeah, the opening 10 minutes of the Battle of Wolf 359 is absolutely
so
spectacular.
What
I remember watching this. I was in college at the time. I had to sneak into my roommate's room because she had a TV. She had the lone TV in the apartment at the time.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just a really great pilot, even though all the characters aren't fully formed yet, with the exception of Dukat and Quark. I remember at the time I wasn't crazy about all the religious and spiritual aspects, but over time I've grown to appreciate the nuance of that. But just in terms of storytelling, it's a grand slam right out of the park.
Also, first reaction.
And I thought the pacing was really off in parts, and I almost fell asleep during part of it. But we'll get into that. I have to be the straw that stirs the drink, otherwise it's too much of a love fest.
Okay, would you like a little bit of development history? Because we'll start with that.
Always.
Just a little bit, because
regale me.
Top of the series. So originally pitched by Michael Piller back in the day. I'm going to get onto the Babylon 5 controversy in a bit, which we will talk about that. But it's a footnote in the history. But eventually, Michael Piller, Rick Berman were approached about the idea of doing another Star Trek series, and I think it was Piller was keen on doing the idea of let's do something different. Let's step away from the sort of half traditions of a starship going somewhere, but they wanted to keep it in the core of the sort of roots of Star Trek, because originally it was wagon train to the stars. It was people crusading across the unknown lands and trying to experience to give on the way, but they wanted to approach it on a different front, and it was compared to I forget, it's a film or a series called The Rifleman. But it's going to be the Rifleman in space, a man and his son coming to a dilapidated frontier town on the edge of known civilization. And yes, I did just pull that from Memory Alpha. Thank you very much for those that are keeping count.
You're hired.
Absolutely. So it's very much keeping to that kind of Western theme of, instead of people roving around, is dealing with the frontier sort of frontier medicine, as Bashir would quite joyfully say in this episode. Berman, Robert Heward Wolfe eventually said, we had the country doctor, we had the barkeeper, we had the sheriff, we had the mayor, we had it all. He even had the common man, Miles O'Brien, the Native American Kiro. It was very much sort of put out as this is tapping to, culture appropriation wherever you can find it, but it was tapping into that kind of old American folklore of being there out on the frontier and dealing with things on the unknown. And I think the other part of it was they wanted to delve into more about what makes the Federation tick, what spins the wheels in terms of politics and in relationship to Bajor, what is the relationship there and how do things sort of work in a completely alien, unknown setting. And would you like to know why Bajor was picked? Do any of you guys know why Bajor was picked? No, but do you know?
I would imagine it's probably because of how much of an impression Michelle Forbes made and how much they like that mythology.
Bingo. It was purely Michelle Forbes. Because for those that don't know, Michelle Forbes was originally the choice for Major Kira. Or obviously it was going to be Ro. It was going to be Ensign Ro in that role, but it was going to fill the role that Major Kira or Nana Visitor ended up playing. And they wanted her that much that they went, oh right, it's going to be at Bajor. We're going to be exploring her civilization until she's went, no, I don't want to do a series.
All respect to Nana Visitor, but when I die, we're going to get Playing in Heaven 7 seasons of Michelle Forbes on DS9.
Wouldn't that make a great enjoy it thoroughly. If we get Star Trek What If, wouldn't that be good?
So, controversial opinion. I'm going to have two of them here. One, I think this series is way stronger without Ensign Ro, because the fact that Ensign Ro is a Starfleet officer, albeit a disgraced one with Bajoran heritage, means that you get a way different perspective that Major Kira offers. And B, I absolutely adore Nana Visitor and every nuance she brings to the role, and I would not trade her in for anything. I do not believe that she would that Michelle Forbes would have had the requisite chemistry with the other characters, or if she did, I don't think she showed on TNG. She worked in those characters because they're all very formal, very, sort of like, oh, we're the, flagship crew, where they're all a little bit stuffy and a little bit high-minded. We all go to, string quartets and we play Sherlock Holmes on the holodeck. And it's like, Ro is a good contrast to those characters. I don't know how well she would play opposite someone like Quark or Dukat, given that she is still explicitly a Starfleet officer. Kira gives you a much different perspective, and I prefer that.
So, would you like to know what they did with Ro? Would you like to know what they did with Ro in the books? I may have told you this already. You know this. In Ro in the books, because after they try and do sort of like a
row in the books.
Row your boat, yeah, Final Frontier style. They end up sort of continuing DS9 on in the books, which is obviously non-canon now. But they place Ro as the commander of DS9 and sets her up with a romance with Quark. So there we go. I've ruined Ro for you forever.
Dude, imagine how wrinkly their noses would be.
Don't worry, Michelle Forbes ruined Ro by refusing to. 90s era Trek is the story of how can we get Michelle Forbes to sit down for a long form series. She won't fucking sit down, because they also offered her what ended up becoming Torres's role on Voyager.
Oh,
and that
really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, except for Torres or Chakotay, yeah.
Any actor kids out there, say yes to projects. Don't say no to things because you don't want to be in genre, because then you're going to be stuck in lesser genre works the rest of your career.
Stars, it's almost like the people who wrote award-winning television for decades kind of knew that they had a good thing with Michelle Forbes, and that's why they wanted her. So I know you're not maybe as big a fan as some of us are, but trust me, she could do it.
Universe,
I don't.
There's a Timelines Talks where we're sitting here going, Stars is going, man, I'm glad they didn't cast Nana Visitor in the end. Wow, what shit series and that would have been.
Well, guess what? I wouldn't have heard of.
She just would have been without
this.
She just would have been it would have been the Paris storyline, right?
Yeah.
Basically.
Avery Brooke goes to the penal colony where, Ensign Ro has been arrested from being a Maquis traitor and recruits her.
Tom Paris.
To help him liaise with the Bajoran government on Deep Space Nine.
So I don't know if we actually have the first draft script that they wrote for the character, but
a little bit.
First thought.
Yeah, go on.
My first thought would be that it makes sense for her character to have resigned from Starfleet and be fully the Bajoran civilian liaison for them, because she hated Starfleet so much. She could have stepped. I mean, they did rewrite a good portion of the role apparently, but she would have stepped right into that Kira role pretty well, I think.
Yeah. So the early story treatment for what became the Emissary was originally titled The Ninth Orb, which kind of, when we were watching, we were like, wow, shame the Bajoran Tears of the Prophets don't play a major role in the story, because this could have been like a Dragon Ball or possibly Thanos, Infinity War kind of collectible.
For context, the only time they come up is the Orb of Time to justify trials of tribulations, and when Cisco needs to get knocked out of his existential funk in the 7th season opener. That's the only other time they really come up.
It's bad, but yeah, it was called the Ninth Orb, and in it, and just paraphrasing from Memory Alpha, in it, Ro Laren met Benjamin Sisko for the first time just before his meeting with Captain Picard. Another plotline this treatment featured was a black market on the station controlled by an individual named Rulod. Cisco promised Opaka
Chicken roulade.
Yeah, Cisco promised Opaka he would stamp out the black market, and later confronted Rulad, said Rulad owned a base in the Denorius Belt and was the person who informed Gul Dukat about the Bajoran wormhole information, which later reached Odo via Quark. So, yeah, this could have been a bit more, almost expansive, a bit more sort of like harder sci-fi by the sounds of it. More
it could have been.
Yeah.
As it is, I really appreciate this, because you said this is the first spin-off for Star Trek, and kind of like, I guess you aren't counting TNG as a spin-off, more of as a sequel, which I guess makes sense. And I really enjoy it because, as opposed to Voyager, which is basically just a straight continuation of TNG in terms of the ethos, like, yeah, the setting is different, but in terms of the actual story structure, it's mostly the same. DS9 is a way more natural spin-off where it's, you say Wagon Train to the Stars, that's like, well, what happens when the wagon train stops? It's like, and it literally like epitomizes that, with the first 10 minutes being the last 10 minutes of a TNG episode, being the formation of, well, what does that look like when they've walked out and their problems are dealt with? What happens when Captain Picard's trauma is resolved, but no one else's is, And DS9 taking that concept and running with it is so much of its strength, is it's just so having to deal with consequences.
This is such a mature, for the 90s, right? Bear in mind, this is 1993. There are no series that are dealing with male masculine trauma at this point. Cisco deals with his trauma of losing his wife, and directly as a result of the episode, it affects his relationship with Picard. It directly affects his relationship with people on the station and with the Prophets. It's a huge revelation for television at that time.
Right, we're coming out of the 80s where every other movie was about like post-Vietnam trauma in men, right? So this is something that wasn't transporting PTSD. That trope to genre television. And the other groundbreaking thing is here, like, we're so used to it now, having 30 Marvel movies in a combined cinematic universe. Like, this is a huge leap for television to have another show in the same universe, spinning off of.
That isn't called Degrassi.
Yeah, right. That is Degrassi, like
the next generation.
Yeah,
right. It's not a sequel; it's happening concurrently, right? You don't see this again until really like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel.
Yeah, and all the Stargate spin-offs as well. They all sort of came around. Right. There wasn't. You had spin-offs like Frasier to Cheers, or Mork and Mindy to, also Cheers. No, what was Mork and Mindy a spin-off from?
I don't fucking know. I mean, it's about Star Trek.
Laverne Shirley, that's correct. Yeah.
Happy Days and
Happy Days, that's right. Yes, yeah. So there were there were things like that where the characters went off, but there was, like you say, there wasn't anything directly relationship, and the fact that the scene opens up with, the show opens up with Locutus and the Battle of Wolf 359 affecting the main character of the show, and him actually, we all remarked when we were watching it, that scene between Cisco and Picard, the very first scene, is electric. There is so much work going on between the two of them.
Oh, before we get that far in, you said that scene with the battle, directed fantastically. It's chaos. It's acrid smoke filling your lungs. It's shaky fires. Hands. It's loud noises. And then when he gets in that shuttle, bam, he pops off. It's totally silent, and all you see is the battle getting smaller and his face reflected. And it's like they really took you through that journey of tone, and you really felt like you were there for that.
Yeah. So there's a structural thing that I really appreciate about this pilot, and I feel like it's something that was missing from Farpoint, because they pull some of the same structural tricks where you don't get all the characters thrown at you at once. There is a case of they are staggered. You meet Cisco first, then you meet this character, this character. Like, you don't meet Dax and Bashir until like maybe half an hour in. And they do a similar thing in Farpoint, where it's like you don't meet Riker and Crusher until like, essentially the second half of the episode. But the reason why I feel like it works so much better here is because while this is a pilot, it is essentially a Cisco episode. Like, you know how it's like you get episodes that are about characters, and it's like, like Data's Day or The Inner Light. Like, these are about a character. And this is fundamentally about Cisco's emotional journey over the course of this hour and a half. And that structure and that focus gives it so much more. You have a strong emotional through line, and you have way more like ability to just like expand out on the central issue, which is about trauma, about healing, about linearity, about subjectivity, about all of these things. Whereas the through line of Farpoint was something more like, well, we've got this Q thing. Well, we've got this Farpoint thing. Well, we've got this jellyfish. Well, we got Troy. Well, we got this weird romance. It's like there's a lot of disparate elements, and they don't really cohere to one or another. There's like one eventually relates to the other, but you only really find out how they relate around like 50 minutes in. Whereas here, everything is about Cisco and about how he has been hurt and how he is dealing with that. And which is, and this is the evolution of the point where you're making about, from like Vietnam PTSD and that informing character action and that kind of thing. Is not only is Cisco wounded, but talking about his pain and revealing that pain to others and allowing them to see him be hurt is a source of strength rather than weakness. It is not a case of, stiff upper lip. This is part of the reason why family works so well, is because there is a certain strength to allowing yourself to be seen to be hurt and working through it. And that's why this pilot works so well for me, because it is fundamentally a character piece.
It's very anti-Roddenberry. Roddenberry would not have wanted any of that. Like, he didn't want didn't want brothers to happen after Best of Both Worlds. Like, that was not something he wanted. Or sorry, family. After Best of Both Worlds.
Yeah.
No, it's great to watch, and you kind of miss it later on in the series because the series transitions from being in the pilot just about Cisco to being more of an ensemble piece. But I really like seeing the jousting between Cisco and Quark, and just seeing how Cisco interacted with all the other figures, and later on that's substituted with Odo and Quark's relationship, and Miles and Bashir sort of pair off.
You get bits and pieces, apart from the Miles and Bashir one, but you get bits and pieces of that. You get a little sort of hint of Quark and Odo. You get a bit of pieces of Kira and O'Brien, and little. Right. They introduce little things here and there, don't they?
Right, and they basically later on in the series they strand Cisco up in his office, and he's just kind of like, guiding everything from ops. But here he's down on the ground. He's lifting up a piece of metal and putting it back down in almost the exact same place.
Oh yeah, can I just raise something that Stars noticed? Kira's shouting at Cisco like, "Can't get your hands dirty." Yet she's wearing the white top that hasn't got a single stain on it.
Oh yeah, that's your 90s TV for you.
That's made of space age polymer fibers to totally resist dirt and smudging.
Okay.
All right,
he's got you there. He's got you there.
Okay, fine. I can see.
So I don't like a lot of that stuff that you mentioned, actually. So I love family, and part of the reason it works for me is you have pretty much three different stories. You have the Wesley story, the Worf story, and the Picard story, but they're all similar in tone, and I feel like they mesh well together. Whereas with this one, you have a great story with Cisco, where it makes your brain a little bit bigger by the end of it, but the juxtaposition of the scenery chewing Cardassians and making the whole space station lighter so we can float it across the system and stuff, it's too disparate in tone for me. And there were times when they're focusing on that B story where I'm thinking, can we just get back to the Cisco stuff? I'd rather hear about that. So the B story feels like your classic, Trek story with the technobabble and everything. I don't think that it meshes as well with what should have kind of been a standalone story for me.
I think
there's easily enough material in that B story to have justified its own episode. It does feel almost like 2 45 miniatures were like smushed together, but it does at least do a good job of setting up the rest of the show. It's doing the rest of the pilot stuff while also doing the character piece. But I will not disagree with you. I think the pacing is hurt by you're getting really invested into the Cisco stuff. They're talking about the linearity of time, about what does it mean to have consequences. What is pain? What is time? What is love? What is pleasure? And then you're cutting over to this Cardassian being an asshole. And it's like, I'm not as invested in this. Like any other thing, this is fine because everyone else is doing their jobs. This is good drama. But what is happening in the wormhole is on such another level that you don't want to break from it,
Yeah.
Can I applaud for a moment Otto's little physical comedy reference to Night at the Roxbury? as Sarge
if you're gonna ask what is love,
Yeah. Hurt me, yeah.
Baby, don't hurt me.
So if you guys are subs to the channel and you were with us as we watched the episode, go back and the part where Cisco realizes, part of me has been here all along watching my wife, and just the expressions on Idol's face as he's like torn apart from inside, that
I love
there's nothing
so
in the
good.
B story that can even come close to that.
Yeah.
So
No,
it
not
just,
even close.
It feels like you have a story up here and a story down here rather than two
It's very
parallel
almost.
stories.
I think I love that moment until the minute they decide they're done with it, and right now Cisco just comes all happy out of the wormhole. He just zooms out, everything's fine. It was all the kind of he was traumatized, he's dealt with it, but then it's just sort of cut off until it pays off later in the season. It would have been nice to have a little epilogue to that with the episode, and it does feel almost like this was they did the inner light before they could grow to do the inner life, you know what I mean? They kind of did the big character moment before they deserved to do it. But I understand.
Well, the thing is, it's especially knowing in retro, we know that Cisco. That's the weird thing about Cisco is that you meet him and then you meet the second version of him after he's gone through all this trauma, and then over the course of the series, Cisco changes 6 or 7 times into someone completely different, and that's the strength of DS9 is seeing these characters here. Shai, you mentioned that no one here is fully formed, and that's to a degree correct, but it's not a problem with performance. I don't feel like anyone here is really bad apart from Alexander Siddig, who is the absolute worst part of this pilot,
and Felicia Susan Oliver Bell.
Well, yes, they are kindred spirits, let's say. But Nana Visitor, Cole Meany, even Cyril Lofton, everyone is performing well. There is no, again, apart from Bashir, there is no massive weak link where you can point at them and say, you're not on the same level as everyone else here. And that's saying something, because that scene between Picard and Cisco in the conference room is so incredible. Not just because of the amount of drama that's going on here, not just because you're seeing a TNG character actually getting confronted with consequences for their actions, mind controlled as they were, which is something that doesn't happen often. But it's also the fact that you are watching Patrick Stewart, who is a Shakespearean actor, one of the greatest living actors of his time. And he is absolutely being met on exactly the same level by Avery Brooks, who is, you've known him for 20 minutes. But the fact that you are watching these two titans just bounce off each other, it's that spark is so immediate that it's
so good.
He has
also a Shakespeare actor. Avery Brooks was also a Shakespearean actor.
Oh yeah, he's teaching. I believe he's teaching acting right now. His credentials are just as immaculate as Patrick Stewart.
Take the
just
moment
not as well known.
Take the moment in that scene where Cisco. There's 2 moments in that scene. There's the first moment where Cisco first drops the whole. Oh yeah, my wife was killed at Wolf 3-5. We met in battle, sir, at Wolf 3-5-9. And then Patrick Stewart. They don't.
Stewart's face.
They don't. But it's great directing work because they don't just suddenly cut or do anything. They let it linger. They let the emotion linger. He sits down, he stands up, he walks to the thing, and then he gingerly addresses it. And the other moment is when, Cisco's talking about, him retiring and actually not being suitable to the post, and Picard starts to cheer him out, and Cisco's having none of it. Avery Brooks just raises it in the
bristles,
meantime, sir. And the first time you actually see someone talking down to Picard, and that you do feel like they are on the same level. You're getting, like you say, 2 titans clashing, which they make up for it in the end, in a very brief scene. But it's so good.
It's interesting. It's the second pilot in a row where Picard is made to feel guilty for the death of someone else, Like the first, in Encounter at Farpoint, right? He's just he reacts. He's like, okay, well then come on the bridge, sit in the chair. That's fine. And in this one, he has to handle it differently. But Picard's
he has a habit of ordering people to their desk. What can he say?
Yeah.
So it's especially interesting seeing these performers on the same level because Otto brought up a great bit of trivia, which is that when Terry Farrell was doing his first scene with Avery Brooks, he basically had to pull him aside and say, "Hey, I'm really sorry, but you're so much more mature than I am, and I'm only 28. I can't top you as an actor, and I need your help. I'm really nervous about this."
Yeah.
And it's like, and you can see that, like, there is a case of these performers are not quite on that level, and they have to just kind of be met with it, and it gives it a different dynamic. That's thing, like Terry Farrell and Alexander Siddig, especially, their characters like start to solidify as time goes on, and their acting definitely improves because they start to work out what are their strengths, how can we play to them. But it's also a case if you really do just have to adjust your performance. You can't act on the same level with everyone in the scene as if they're the same person. And it's like that's also kind of what gives Sisko that nice. It's arguably she's his only friend, really. Like is Dax. Like he's not friends with Kira. Like they are professional like colleagues. That's all they are. His relationship with O'Brien is absolutely of like subordinate and officer. There's friendly enough, but it's very cordial. And it's like Dax is really his only friend in this entire place, and maybe it was something about that conversation that Terry Farrell had with Avery Brooks, but it does change their interaction and gives him that softness, and you need that because otherwise Sisko would come across as kind of like a bit of a hard ass, and like I feel like it helps soften him up so that when he does eventually get through his trauma, it doesn't feel like, oh, that's a completely different character. It feels like, no, this is still the same person, just he's allowing himself to express more. Like, I feel like it's important that you have that.
It's kind of weird because I would like to have seen this, like you said, an earned episode later in the series, a la Inner Light, let it breathe on its own. But on the other hand, they already kind of had this idea when they started, all right, we want to give all this backstory to Sisko. This is how we want to introduce him. We're going to get Stewart in for the pilot to do the handshake at the end, the passing of the torch. So it's really hard to try to get both of those at once. And, in their position, they had to make a sacrifice and said, okay, maybe this, even if this isn't the most cordant episode, it has to be done now to launch the series in the way that we want. So
a necessary sacrifice for television, for brevity's sake, absolutely. But no, I totally take your point. Like, it is a case of there are a few rough spots here, and they have to take a few shortcuts. But it's like I feel like in service of the character arc is great.
Right, hold on, we have to open the can of worms because I'm not a Jadzia fan, and 9 times out of 10, I'm not getting the old man, old friends vibe that apparently everyone else gets. So tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why she's doing great with this character.
In this episode, not so much. Like, you get a little bit of it. At the moment, I think it's Darcy said, she's kind of like being the Spock data analog at this point.
That's absolutely what she's written to be in this episode.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think it's not till late you see a bit more, when they're talking about steamed Hasna, they talk about that, you kind of get a bit more of that aged character. Sorry, shall I go on?
I was just going to say, I think Terry Farrell is an actress who has a lot of poise, and she's 28 here, and even though she was nervous acting with Avery Brooks, she's still very poised in that sense. A little rigid maybe, but it's poise mixed with grace, and that belies age, right? And her eyes to the camera, her eyes are just so deep, and the camera loves that depth, and so it gives you that sense of soulfulness, especially in close up on her, and I think that's what people pick up on her.
Yeah, I feel like with Terry Farrell, it is a case of like I believe in the script notes they mentioned that like for the first season or two they write her as being a bit more cold, a little bit more emotionless, a little bit more wise beyond her years. And the way they chose to portray that was like, that kind of otherworldliness when like she's talking with Sisko about, does he know about that worm inside your bed? It's like, yes, he knows I'm a troll. And it's like, she can do it, but it's not Terry Farrell's strength. Like, if I ask you what Terry Farrell's strength is, it's like it's acting suave and confident and charming
she's better when
and
she's
funny
Kirk than Spock. Really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She is so much more of a Kirk. She has that avuncular edge to her.
Especially when we get to Trials and I can never say that. You know the episode. The flashback episode,
yes.
yeah.
Tribulations.
Tribulations. And it's so much more like playing old or playing mature varies so much from actor to actor on how you choose to portray it. And especially because she is kind of an uncharted waters here. The Trill are not really an explored species. The only time they've turned up in TNG, none of the rules that are in place make any sense with this, because they completely change how the Trill work, how they look even. She doesn't have the same makeup even. And so she's kind of having to fly off the seat of her pants here and go, okay, well, how would a character of this type work? And then I think she just kind of went, like, guys, this isn't quite working. I want to express myself more. And then you start to see more of that spark and that confidence. And I feel like when you become more mature, most of the time you become more confident, because even if you're in uncharted territory, you have, it's like what Cisco is talking about. You use your past experiences to inform how you're going to react to an unknown circumstance.
How old are you, Stars?
Well,
I think you're the youngest one here.
I can't
that was my point I was making.
Maturity.
You're wise beyond your own years with your attitude. So, like, I think you are the Dax analog of us lot. So,
and it's like I feel like it comes across so much more in the later seasons where it's like, oh yeah, I know this, like I know that. And it's like she's never out of her depth unless it's a point of the episode. Whereas here, she is so much more removed, and her only emotional outlet, again, is through Cisco. She doesn't have that friendship with Kira. I think they explore like maybe 2 lines with each other. She doesn't have the same interplay with Quark. She doesn't have an opportunity, really, to show off any of Dax's character strengths or her own acting ability. So it's like, again, it is constrained by the fact that while this is a pilot meant to introduce you to these characters, it's still primarily a Cisco thing, so you only really see her through Cisco's eyes, and like, you know, they have like 2 or 3 scenes together, and it's mostly in service of Technobabble, which has always been a bit of a problem with the 90s era Treks. So, you know,
pop quiz.
I'm dominating this discussion.
Let's go completely off topic now. Pop quiz. What was the original name for Bashir's character?
I read this 2 hours ago. I've already forgotten. It wasn't a great one.
Rayo Vantica.
It wasn't Rayo Vantica, no. It was, in fact, he was going to be Amoros, who's going to be Dr.
That's right. Amoros.
Which, yeah,
Dr.
it's a little
Amoros.
bit more, Casanova.
That sounds like a daytime soap, kind of Dr. Amoros.
Okay, second pop quiz.
What the fuck?
DS9 also had another working name before they finally settled on... Originally, it was going to be Starbase 362, and they said, we're going to call it Deep Space Nine. I thought, that's a perfect name for the title of the show. But originally, they thought of a different name for it.
Babylon 5.
The year was
Shaft in space.
Shaft in space, Hawk in space, yeah. No, they were going to actually. One of the original proposed names was The Final Frontier. I wonder how would that have been a different take if it was called The Final Frontier?
And then they looked at Star Trek 5 and they were like, you know what, better not.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Cyborg 2. It wasn't Michelle Forbes couldn't do it, but Sean Connery could finally come back and reclaim his title as Cyborg. Okay, so how about... Right, what were your best and worst moments of this episode?
Hold on. Before we do the roundtable thing, I got to ask, because we haven't talked about them yet. How many android eternities did it take once they had Odo and Quark in the same room to realize we got something here?
Not long at all. I think it was literally the moment those actors probably read the script together, they went, oh yeah, this is good. These guys gel really well. Honestly.
No, you know what I bet it was? I bet it was like because they have one scene. They have exactly one scene together in this pilot, and like there's a good bit of interplay, but they don't really address each other. It's more like Cisco addressing them individually. And then I bet you they were watching them offset, and they were watching Rene Auberjonois, and they were watching Armin Shimmerman, and they were like, these guys are a hoot. Why the fuck aren't they talking to each other more? And then the best romance of all
You've
Star
got the
Trek.
Sheriff and the Crook. This is the Western situation. It's the Sheriff and the Crook.
The setup is there, but you never know if the chemistry is going to be there, you know?
I didn't think I was going to like him. That's such a good line.
It's a great line.
Roneo delivers that so well. But yeah, no, the Quark and Odo dynamic was there from the start. Like, that was fantastic. That's what I really love about DS9 is they spend time on the character moments as opposed to making characters in the way that TNG did. They went, here's the Doctor, she's sort of had a past relationship with Picard, and here's the security officer, she was on this planet and had all these traumas. It was more like, here's this character and we're going to actually define them by their relationships, not by their memories, which was a better take.
Well, I mean, that's partly true, yeah. Because like a lot of these characters is still carried by, especially with Quark. Like as time goes on, he's more and more defined by his relationship with Ferengi culture and how he doesn't relate to it. Kind of like Worf, which is one of the weirdest things when you realize it, but it is true.
It's the viewer related fish out of water. You've always got to have the analog for the viewer to explain where everything is, and it either comes from someone that's new to the culture or someone that's alienated from the culture.
Yeah. I also feel like it's interesting because, like, every Star Trek series has to have your character to whom you explain humanity to, right? It's it's your Spock, your Data, and on here it's kind of spread amongst a few different characters. It's kind of Odo, but Odo is almost dismissive, if not critical, of humanity and how like solids conduct themselves most of the time. It's kind of Quark, but that's because he's such a interesting personification of capitalism. It's spread out a lot of different characters. Everyone is a mirror for humanity in this one. It's a very interesting route to take it.
Sorry, Shah, you were saying?
I was just changing my headset because my wireless ran out. I did have some point, but I completely forgot what it was.
Okay. All right, let's go around. Let's do our favourite and worst moments from the episode. I'll start with you, Otto. Best and worst.
Slam dunk for me when Sisko takes the profits and he's kneeling over his wife and he realizes he was there all along. If you've ever loved someone intensely, there are moments where part of you will forever be stuck there no matter how old you get. And so it was the climax of the episode. And like you said, it's a shame that he comes out smiling out of the wormhole, joking with Dax or whatever on the view screen. But that moment is, they could have had a more graceful come down from there, but that was a great emotional climax.
Yeah, and I was talking about it in the watch along, but I absolutely love how Brooks plays that moment where he's like, every time I close my eyes, she's there, and his ugly crying. Like, this is something that like I think is a valid criticism of Discovery, especially, is that like I miss ugly crying. I like it when you can tell that the person is just like they look like a mess. They look like they're emotionally drained, not just the Hollywood. We're gonna squirt something in your eye and it's gonna run down. I hate the single tear. I understand why it's the way it is, but I love ugly crying.
Is your complaint that there's not enough crying on Discovery? I don't think anyone made that.
It's the style of crying. It's the style.
No,
that's why you're on the show, Shine.
Yeah. All right. How about your worst moment, Otto?
Oh well, we got to go back around.
Okay. We'll come around. Okay, Shy. Your favorite moment.
Oh, for me, it's the trio of like Sisko Picard moments. The initial battle at Wolf 359, just that the escape pod shot alone has been burned in my brain for 30 years. But then go from that to Picard and Sisko's first scene where he's like so angry at him and Picard's feeling shame to the final scene where Sisko's come around and Picard's sort of welcoming in and handing off the torch to him. Like that, those three scenes sort of sum up the entire arc of Sisko's character in that episode, really.
You don't even need the stuff in the middle, just have that.
yeah, all that beautifully shot like Prophet stuff, all those amazing like match cut sweeping shots. Yeah. No, there's so many good moments in it, but yeah, I love those scenes.
All right, Stars.
I had to split between two because the best ones have been taken. But I will say one of them is easily between Ben and Jake when Jake is trying to get some sleep on the floor and he realizes that his dad's around. He's like, Dad, what are you doing up? And then Cisco, like Ben, just has this look on his face, and just Brooks just portrays that melancholy and that sadness and that pride and that love. And there's just something in the way that he says, "I was thinking about your mom," and just like he says so much with just a few words. And even though, like, Sarah Lofton and Avery Brooks became so much closer over the series, but even now, like, you get that sense of affection. You can tell that they really did care for each other, and like that relationship just gets so much play over the series, and you can really see why it's done so well. And my second pick would be between Kira and Bashir, when they're talking about frontier medicine.
That was your
and
best
about
pick?
how he'll.
That's your best?
Oh, because it's such a good Kira moment.
Okay.
Oh, you'll find the natives to be a friendly and simple folk. And it's like, the problem with Starfleet, right, is that they are the heroes, so more often than not, they are right. And it is that part of the reason why DS9 is so strong is because it talks about the fact that, hey, Starfleet's great, but not everyone can be a saint in paradise. You can be just as bad as the Borg with your assimilationist policies. The Federation has problems. And guess what? He may be, like, idealistic, he may be well-meaning, but Bashir epitomizes everything that can be wrong about Starfleet in that scene, because he is not looking at an alien race that is in obvious pain and in need of help and thinking of them. He is thinking of himself and how he can advance his personality. And then Kira slaps him the fuck down, and it's utterly deserved. And that is a really good, like, that's a thesis moment. That is why does this series need to exist? That is why that needs to exist.
Yeah.
This is our response to TNG. And
yeah, and
that's the thing with the deconstruction. You need to deconstruct it so you can reconstruct it and make it stronger.
Yeah, and that scene's like beautifully meta in that, you have Alexander Siddig, who's this Sudanese British actor, coming in as the part of the colonizer, as the part of the sort of imperial presence, the way the British were the colonizers in Sudan. And so he's on the other side of that now, and Kira gets to smack him down, as you said, for coming in like with that sort of attitude.
Yeah, that's always so very present in there, and it's like, it's such an interesting melting pot of ideas, as DS9, because it's not just, Wagon Train to the Stars, the Frontier Town, but it's also post-World War II reconstruction. It's also about, spiritual movements and stuff like that. There's so many layers to all the metaphors that you can just effortlessly go and untangle them all, and each of them has something to say that is prescient and interesting. But that moment especially just frames a lot about the relationship, and it says a lot about where Bashir needs to grow and where he does eventually get to.
Yeah. So, speaking of metaphor or high concept metaphors, I think my favorite thing is just the entirety of Cisco talking to the prophets. Like the idea of a person dealing with their trauma having to explain to a bunch of creatures that have no concept of what time is, that don't exist. I remember I told this story to you guys. I remember sitting down and watching this with my dad and saying, Dad, I said to my dad, what is linear? Because I had no idea what the word meant, not the concept. I knew what time was, but I didn't know what the word linear meant. And like him having, like, with the appreciation of Cisco having to do the whole thing of explaining what time is, what birth, death, and reproduction is in the concept of trauma with his own life to a series of creatures that have no concept to it. For a series like Deep Space Nine, which is supposed to be sort of very sort of down, dark and gritty and a bit more sort of based in realism in terms of Star Trek universe, ends up with a very high concept property. It's so good. I absolutely adore
You know what it
that
is?
idea.
That's the fulfillment of what Q says in All Good Things, is that it's not just about charting nebula and meeting new species. It's about plumbing the meanings of existence and your own being. And it's like DS9 delivers on that in episode 1 in such a strong way. Yeah. And again, like I was talking about how it's a kind of a deconstruction of Starfleet with the scene with Kira and Bashir. But Cisco talking to the prophets is absolutely a reconstruction of Starfleet and why they are our heroes and why they're so good,
Yeah.
and why they are so pure is because they genuinely believe in like understanding disparate viewpoints and incorporating them into their being and becoming better people as a result of it. Like there's such a good through line there.
Okay, let's go on to worst moments. Auto.
Probably the final 1/3 of the B story, because I felt like that's where it really started to pull me away from Cisco stuff when I didn't want to be. So I just felt like the tone brought it down too much, and then that's where it became a little bit discordant from just in terms of tone.
Yeah. Shy?
Like I said, when I initially watched this back in the 90s, I wasn't too high on all the spiritual aspects. And even though I can appreciate now that they're well done with some nuance, they still fall a little flat for me. The religiosity of the series. Yeah.
Okay.
Is there a way in which you would have improved it in the pilot specifically?
No, I mean, if you're gonna go for it, you got to go for it. I mean, I guess ultimately, I don't know if you're gonna circle back around to the comparisons between Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine. Like the scale of Deep Space Nine, then and even now in these early episodes, the station always just felt too small. Like and so then the presentation of the spirituality felt too small. I would have liked to have seen some actual larger crowds of worshippers. If you're going to do it, do it.
That's essentially what Battlestar Galactica became, wasn't it? It was the embracement of the ideas of what Ronald D. Moore took from DS9 of spirituality to the extreme almost.
Yes, and that's the downfall of that show as well. that and splitting your attention with Bionic Woman. But that's my big.
You know what? You just reminded me of Shy. You reminded me of that episode. I can't remember the exact episode, but it's a conversation between O'Brien, Kira, and Worf, where Kira and Worf understand spirituality and O'Brien doesn't, and he just can't connect with it. And it's like, I don't know about your own spiritual beliefs, but it's like sometimes when it comes to stuff like this, either you're in it and you get it, or you're out of it and you don't. And I feel like I'm out of it, and I understand it from like I can objectively appreciate this is a good depiction of spirituality, but because I'm not spiritual myself, I don't quite get it. You know, maybe that's part of the reason with it, like the distance in my own personal being.
I just don't think. I think if you're going to have that spiritual aspect, you really need to bring an actor or set pieces that are really going to convey that sense.
I think they get there with the Bajoran stuff, especially. I think they do end up with they sort of redefine the Bajoran spirituality, and Nana Visitor definitely champions a lot of that with her rebellious. You know, she has a rebellious instinct, but she is a deeply spiritual person with her beliefs.
Oh no, Nana Visitor definitely.
I think
is
they sort of turn her into that, don't they?
Example of spirituality on the show. Yeah.
You know, I can see where you're coming from, because as I rack my brain now trying to think about it. There's a lot of stuff on the promenade where you have medium-sized crowds of 20 Bajorans. There's lots of stuff in caves, in tight little quarters. Sometimes someone has a candle lit in their quarters while they're talking, but there's no. Where are the massive monuments? Where are the stained glass windows? Ironically, maybe
the Cardassians fucked them up, didn't they? There was a lot of like, it was, you know, we are post-war sacked Bajoran government. You know, they spend a lot of years getting some of these relics back, or even unearthing them from ancient sort of. Like,
the closest you get to tangible examples of spirituality is the orb when Opaka brings it to show it, and it's like that's all they've got.
Well, let Otto finish it.
But I'm just saying, as someone whose father is a pastor and has been engulfed in it his whole life, ironically, the most authentically religious part of DS9, at least that jumps to mind right now, is in season 7 when Dukat makes his cult and they go into they're in the main room of the temple where they have, the table set up, and he's giving the sermon, and it's like, okay, this is actually a little more in line with with my own experiences of religion.
It's post-war spiritual exploitation. You've got a lot of figures that jump into a weak and fragile society and exploit them for what they are. Hence why Kai Wynn came to power, using the same kind of things. You have a lot of, they're talking about the provisional government not being so provisional, and talking about how everything's quite fragile, and the spiritual Apaka doesn't last for long, and things starting to, some of the Vedics are even corrupt after a while. It's a very realistic look, also realistic human look in contemporary standards, to how, yes, there is faithful spiritualization, the embracing of Sisko as the emissary, of Kira being, a true representation and embracing all these festivals and being the one sort of focal point for the Bajoran spiritualization, but there's also all the outside fringes that are exploiting it. You have both sides, and that's the nuance of DS9 that we love.
I feel like there's also a bit of a tension between the fact that Star Trek is essentially a spiritual show. It is not about religion. And that's what makes DS9 so, anomalous against all the other ones. I can't think of a single other Star Trek one that really touches on it almost at all. And there's a certain tension between arguably your best representation of Bajoran spirituality and scale, and of, numinous feeling, of that feeling of looking upon something and understanding, communing with religion, is the Bajoran wormhole, which is essentially reduced down to a scientific marvel. It's artificial in construction. And that's the tension, is that while they touch on that, on the differing views of is this science, is this religion, and that, I don't feel like they ever quite resolved it perfectly. It never felt like they came to a satisfying spiritual end to that. It was always just kind of left open to interpretation. But I suppose for some people, that's part of the strength of it as well.
Well, not to be glib, but isn't that spirituality? You're not going to get a satisfying bow wrapped up. You have to. Lots of times it's just left open ended, and your faith is what carries the journey.
Yeah, but it's also the case of looking at it as a faithful representation of spirituality is a franchise that is historically aspiritual, capable of giving you a depiction of spirituality that jives with someone who has genuinely had experience of it. It's to a degree, it's kind of like outsiders looking in. Are you ever going to get the insider look, really, type thing?
You've forgotten the tale of Chakotay, my friend, and his great spiritual journey of the Sky People.
Akushimaya, Stars, what is your worst moment in this episode?
I would probably have to say there's a few really rough moments. I don't want to say Bashir, because that moment on the promenade where he's trying to what they artificially give Odo the ability to I don't know anything about medical stuff. What you put pressure on it? It's Odo, you've lived among solids for 30 years. You probably know to put pressure on a wound. You've been on the promenade. And they do it just to give Bashir a moment so that he's not a complete wet noodle. I'm trying to think of really rough spots.
You're being very gracious by leaving Jen Sisko for Idol to pick at the end.
I'm trying not to just say
that wasn't what I was going to go for. That's not my worst moment. She's pretty
okay, then in which case I'll say it then.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'll say she's way better at portraying a weird, emotionless, objective space alien than she is a real human being, which is a sad thing, considering the fact that she is I am told by people that she is a real human being. I'm not sure I believe it.
Her assignment was to rock that bathing suit, and she did it, by gum. She rocked the heck out of that 90s.
Yeah, it was very 90s. Scrap, yeah. All right, Idol, worst moment, go.
I'm not entirely. I mean, I'm happy with even the bad sort of Jen and Sisko interplay, because people are people. People act the way they do. But I wasn't very keen on the first interaction with Apaka and Sisko. It was very disjointed. She has about 5 seconds with him, and then all of a sudden they're talking about the deep politics of Bajor. Then she shows him a tear. It's all rushed. This is supposed to be the leader of the spiritual civilization. Sisko meets her for the first time, and already he's getting the lowdown. And it felt it needed more attention. It needed a bit more drawn out to it. And we get a lot less of Kai Parker in the series than I feel like we need. I feel like we need more of that build up before she's eventually technically often stranded on the planet. Sorry, spoilers for a later episode.
For this 30-year-old show.
Yeah, for this 30-year-old show. But hey, if you're coming for the first time, you're on the wrong podcast, my friend.
Yeah.
That would probably be my worst moment. Okay, last question before we wrap it up. So, I appreciate, Stars, you are younger than most of us, so you weren't probably there watching it sort of round about pilot time, but as an introduction to the brand new series, or at the time you watched it, for a pilot, was this pilot good enough for you to come back into it, or were you one of the Star Trek fans, like I kind of was like this as well, you kind of watched early DS9 and then didn't come back and appreciate it till much later? Also,
I think this is the quintessential shy porn question, so it's a shame he's gone for this. Now, I didn't watch this or TNG really live as it aired. I'm sure I caught stuff here. It's the one I cottoned on to, so I couldn't turn myself in the Wayback Machine and tell you that. I know it took me longer to develop my loving relationship with DS9 than it did with other series, and you know, as the Black Sheep series, that's sort of natural. So I more want to hear Shy's thoughts.
Yeah, well, wait for him. Stars.
Yeah. So I never got to watch DS9 as it was originally airing. I remember like watching TNG and Voyager because I think they probably were more heavily syndicated. And DS9 is not really a series that rewards dropping in and dropping out. My big exposure to it was 2 episodes on a DVD, which was Way of the Warrior Part 1 and 2, and then Trials and Tribulations, which is, when you think about it, like Way of the Warrior is a pretty decent encapsulation of DS9. Trials and Tribulations is very much not. That is very much not what the rest of the show is like. No. But like because I only first watched Emissary properly, like actually sat down and watched it like maybe 2 or 3 years ago with my boyfriend when we just did the entire watch, and I was struck by how strong of a statement it is, and how just no, we're doing our own thing. You are getting, at best, one holdover character and a cameo from the main character of the previous show. Everything else is almost completely antithetical to the previous one, and we don't care if you don't like it. We're going to go ahead and do it, and you will learn to love it, by God. And like, obviously, I can't speak for how I would have reacted back in the day. I would have been 3, I'm pretty sure. So, you know, I probably would have been like goo goo gaga.
And don't remind him.
But just attacking you, don't worry.
Yeah.
But like, as it was when I first watched this a few years ago, I was like, wow, that's a fucking strong start, and it justified my faith in the series.
Shy, you look like you live on the Baku planet, so don't worry about it, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah, as I mentioned before, I was eagerly anticipating this pilot. I snuck into my roommate's room to watch it, and it was enough to keep me watching.
So you're an original. You kept going through it like year by year.
I watched week to week.
Wow.
Taped it when I couldn't watch. I saw it live as it was happening, and it was a good watch. I still preferred TNG. You know, I think TNG was just a sharper, cleaner production for me. Although that's what makes DS9 appeal to a lot of people, is the fact that it is a little rougher, it's a little grittier, a little darker. Yeah, like DS9 didn't really take off for me until Worf arrived.
Yeah, and
then the series really
jumping
took off for me. Yeah, but yeah, that's a good thing. Jumping the Klingons is always a good thing. Because then DS9 started really pioneering the arc story. That wasn't a huge thing outside of soap operas in television, right? Like the Dominion War and all that. So, yeah.
I think I remember watching as I say, I've said before, you know, he used to sort of the reasons I sort of treasure moments with my father, like, because, you know, I used to see him once every couple of weeks, and every time we used to sit and watch Star Trek, and we watched, watching a lot of the DS9 pilots, and I think by the time DS9 was getting into his 2nd or 3rd season, I was sort of starting to wane. Well, he moved away, and we stopped watching a lot of Star Trek together, and I naturally fell off it, and I was one of those people that when it first aired, I went, oh, it's just on a space station, it doesn't doesn't go anywhere. I don't want to watch this. This is like really crap. Like, and I was young.
Ironically, the space station does go somewhere in the first episode.
Like, it moves about 4 foot to the wormhole. But anyway, it wasn't until I was sort of more late teens that I kind of went back to it and watched. I think I picked up when round about the Dominion War season 5, late season 5, and I came back into it and I kind of realised that, oh shit, this is something here. This is like never been exposed to serialized television outside of possibly the Power Rangers before, you know. And this is
God.
Yeah, sorry. And from that point it's sort of been marked as my favourite series from there on. So I kind of went off and then came back onto it. Which I think is a lot of a modern story for a lot of Star Trek fans, especially the older ones who sort of like say, like, I've only watched TNG and Voyager, and a lot of them have now sort of watched a lot more modern television, gone back to DS9 and kind of gone, actually, why did I not like this in the first place? This was awesome. You know, there's a lot of DS9 revival love going on lately that I've seen for a lot of fans, especially new fans as well, that are picking up because it's perfect. It's a serialized show. Like, it's already a modern day format. Like, it works surprisingly well.
It is a good gateway to serialization because they try to hold true to both. Because in smack dab in the middle of the Dominion War, you have Take Me Out to the Holosuite, and that's not the only incident. So they do try to give you a little bit of both.
Yeah. All right, Stars, give us your.
Hold on.
Oh no, hang on.
I know where you're going. I want to hit the MVPs first because I really like that.
Okay, all right. Let's do that. Who is your favourite character of the episode? Please, also, since you're so gagging.
Kira. You know, obviously Sisko gets the lion's share of the screen time, but Kira is the glue. She's the straw that stirs the drink. She's the glue that, whatever metaphor you want to use. She interacts with almost everyone. We already gushed about the scene with Bashir, putting him in his place. She doesn't get a ton to do with Dax yet, but she will, and she threatens Quark, which she does a billion times throughout that. She works with Chief O'Brien, trying to hold the station together while Sisko's off playing with the Prophets, and she really feels like the gatekeeper of DS9 from the Federation. If you want DS9 to be run by Starfleet, you got to make sure that she gets your approval. So it's sort of the way she interacts with everyone. She is kind of the glue that holds it all together. So
it's this thing where, like, if you didn't have Kira, you'd be like, wow, the Bajorans are lame. You'd be like, well, Ensign Rowe is an outliner. All they've got is a few monks, some random guys in ops, and Kaio Parker. And it's like, that would be all you have. But Kira is such a bastion of strength that she makes such a strong impression. You're like, you know what, there's something to these Bajorans. And then they start adding more and more of those characters that you start to fall in love with.
All right, Shai, who's your MVP, most valuable person?
I mean, I think it's Sisko because the whole episode's about him. But I treasure this pilot because I like his very quirky, off-kilter performance of Sisko in this pilot, and I'm sad that it kind of gave way to more stentorian, Avery Brooks in later DS9. I like the odd smiles, the odd vocal exclamations here and there.
Yeah, they never quite went away, but they're very acute in this pilot.
Yeah. So I enjoy that, and I think he I especially like the way he interacts with each character, as I was talking about earlier. That sort of goes away a little bit, but yeah, I like him sort of down on the ground.
Oh, you gotta be quick. The police coming for you.
Yes, red alert. All right, Stars, your MVP of the episode. Let me remind you, you can pick the same as someone else. You don't have to be different.
No, I can't. I'm gonna go ahead and split the difference. I'm gonna say Cole Meany, actually, like as O'Brien, as a guy who is just so thoroughly having the worst day of a new job possible. Of hey,
it will
break
only
the
get
laws
better
of
from
physics. It only gets worse. Break the laws of physics and move a station to the mouth of a wormhole. Hey, we have 6 photon torpedoes and fuck all for weapons. Make us look like we have a threatening posture. Hey, the Cardassians took every component, yes, even the toilet seats, make it look good and work. And then he just does it. And he doesn't complain. He kicks the freaking thing and it works.
He complains.
Because
he moans like a...
Not so much in this episode.
No,
he makes it clear that they're working with limited resources, but he's not complaining and griping so much yet, because that would be unprofessional to do it in front of a senior officer. It's when he gets his crew of attendant maintenance technicians and Bajoran workers, it's like that's when he really start complaining, and I enjoy that. But he's a consummate professional here. I really enjoy his dynamic with Picard on the transporter room. He just plays the working man so well, and he is such a normal guy. And I appreciate this normal guy working in space, 9 to 5. I'm clocking out. That's your problem now. I always appreciate that about O'Brien. And it's not what you would think would make a successful Star Trek character, but it does, because he's just so relatable. And I will pick my second, Patrick Stewart.
Wait, you get a second?
You can't.
I would have taken Patrick Stewart.
No, man,
who's your
MVP?
Second. Damn it!
That's fine.
Fine. Okay, no, my pick was going to be Patrick Stewart, but only because...
Yeah, my pick for most valuable person in this DS9 pilot was the TNG character.
TNG guy. Literally is, because he literally gives Sisko perspective. From Locutus to Picard, he is the one, and it's Patrick Stewart, he throws his whole weight into it. I think he gives the episode as a start, not just the torch-bearing handoff, but also the dynamic character profile that Sisko needs to bounce off of to sort of assert the kind of character that Sisko is, and I think that's what sort of gives that kind of extra gravitas. Not that the series needs it, but it adds to the dynamic, really.
If you pulled out all the Picard stuff, then suddenly Sisko is the emotional scale is way more towards sadness, and he's sort of stumbling through. There's a faded heartbeat in the background of the whole episode. That the noise that they added, but there's no, the only gut punch then is coming from his wife's death, and so that really helps stiffen him up a little bit.
You need that gut punch, otherwise the entire weight is on Felicia Bell, and she is not ready to take that weight.
Yeah. Patrick Stewart's the best actor in Encounter at Firepoint, and he is the best actor in Emissary. If he was in the Voyager premiere, he would have been the best actor in that. He would have been the best actor in Broken Bow. He's So yeah,
he's got 3 pilots. He's the best actor in. Come on.
Yeah.
I also find it interesting that his interactions with Picard kind of form how Sisko is going to interact with Starfleet Command from going on forward. Almost every admiral that he comes up against, they basically have to concede, yeah, this is a special relationship you have with the station. If I pull you out of there, it's going to be a fucking problem. You're emotionally compromised, but I can't pull you out of here.
Okay, Stars, give us your appropriate metric.
All right. Gentlemen, I need to know how many 24th century lemonade trays that go through the bottom instead of being on a standing tray out of 10 would you give this episode?
How many lemonade trays?
That's my trademark, you bastard. That was the most mind-expanding part of the whole two-parter.
It's why is this not a thing?
That's real future tech. Yeah.
It's so good.
All right, let's go reverse order.
I'm gonna give it an 8. I've toyed with giving it a 9, but there is just a couple of little acting choices and a few editing choices, especially like Sisko and Opaka, and then obviously Gull Gisette's really bad scenery chewing that just knock it a few points, but it's so strong. There could have been a bit more sort of a better A and B story relationship sort of syncing as well, but yeah, a solid 8 from me.
I'm going to go ahead and give this 9 24th century lemonade trays out of 10 because, yeah, there are structural problems. Yeah, there are acting problems. Yeah, there are rough bits here and there. Yeah, Quark is wearing the wrong nose. But I don't care because it's not what it's about. It's about that scene with Sisko and the Prophets, and that's what it's about. And that has aged so much better than any other Star Trek pilot I can think of. It has such a strong emotional core and such a good journey, and it works as the emotional through line of an hour and a half, TV movie, which is kind of the structure is. Everything else falls away, and there is there's a few rough parts to it, but I'm never embarrassed by it like I am in Farpoint. I'm never laughing at the screen at a weird transition like I am in The Cage. I'm not waiting for the plot to happen like I am in Caretaker.
Oh, can I quickly interject? Sorry, this is very... Michael Piller even said this in Memory Alpha, and I noticed as well. This is very similar to The Cage. This is, a Starfleet officer encountering an alien species that takes them to all their past events. Like, it's a similar Cage on a different scale. Anyway, sorry, I'll stop running.
Yeah, no, but reframed. Like, it's an interesting thematic point, because it almost feels like Star Trek can't escape the Cage, almost. It's the original DNA. It's too ingrained to escape. But yeah, I've got to give it a 9 out of 10. I love this pilot, and it's
8 and 9.
such a strong...
Shy.
I give it an 8. I give it an 8. The action is super solid up front.
Hold on, 8 what, Shy?
8 24th century lemonade glass holders where the thing extends below the midline of the glass so it doesn't spill when you're carrying on the beach. Yeah, I give it 8 of those out of 10, which is, of course, 32 glasses of lemonade. Yeah, it introduces the characters all pretty well. The action's great. The journey for Sisko is really good. Even when it stumbles, when Kaiopaka decides to take him down the staircase from the Nazi set on Last Crusade. I don't know why that secret fountain staircase is there, but yeah, it brings you in. It makes you hungry for more, and set you up for the next week's episode of Babylon 5 or Deep Space Nine. One of those two. Yeah.
Auto.
In retrospect, we shouldn't have ended with me. I give this 6.35 lemonade trays out of 10.
You get a point here. Come on.
When we sit down and break it down structurally and talk about all the different stuff, I like it more in concept. But when I watch it, I'm not entertained a lot of the time, and I kind of am watching the clock sometimes, and it's not one that I find endlessly repeatable like a lot of Star Trek episodes. So it just doesn't do it for me. There's definitely some highs for sure, especially in the acting department, but just the pacing of it doesn't work for me.
Okay, and there we have it. Our review of Star Trek Deep Space Nine's pilot.
The sun has gone down completely while we've been recording this, by the way.
Yes, this has been one of our longer ones. We will be back very soon with our next pilot, which will be Voyager's very own Caretaker, and exclusive to Twitch subs of this channel. Twitch subs of this channel, you're probably watching on YouTube. If you go to our Twitch channel and subscribe and link your Discord, you can get our watch along of this episode as well, which I post on our Discord. So we had a good time with this episode as well. If you're interested in more, we are going to be streaming this coming Wednesday. We'll be playing some Elite Force, which I'm very much excited to do as well. And we'll be back with more things. Keep an eye on our Discord for more events, and our Twitter for my inane ramblings on there. And if you want to go watch a video of me being drunk, that's also on YouTube as well right now. Yeah, we'll be back for more pilots. So let's wrap this up and say thank you. Also, thank you, Shy. Thank you, Stars. We will see you soon. Ta-ra.